So my task today is to just give you a little bit of a brief overview of, why we chose the indirect source rule to really advocate for our air quality being improved, and the advocacy that's taken place on the issue to date. Those documents that I put into the chat are really just intended to give you some background information. I think most of the folks who are in here have been part of our indirect source campaign in one way or another, but if you do need that extra sort of reminder, you can start there. I will very briefly categorize the indirect source rule as an attempt to initiate rulemaking on a state level to reduce diesel emissions from sites that attract a lot of mobile sources of diesel emissions. So we've talked a lot with many of you about how that includes construction sites and rail yards, distribution centers, places where a lot of mobile sources are coming and often idling. And these non-road sources of diesel emissions, like locomotives and construction equipment, to give some examples, those are estimated to contribute up to 65% of the diesel emissions in the major population centers in Oregon, including the Tri-County area, where we are in the 95th percentile for exposure to diesel pollution. So it's a really obvious, thing to try and get at to reduce diesel emissions in our area. It's also kind of a hard thing to do. The Breathe Collaborative, which includes Neighbors for Clean Air, Northwest Environmental Defense Center, and Green Energy Institute at the law school, and folks who are atmospheric chemists at PSU and Reed College. We all worked together on this policy because it was the most achievable of very few regulatory options available to us to deal with the problem of diesel pollution that is so prevalent in this area. And the reason that that is the case is that federal law precludes state and local governments from directly regulating non-road vehicles. So like I said, those construction engines or a locomotive, our local governments don't have a lot of power on directly regulating those vehicles, but they can regulate these sites that those vehicles tend to congregate at. So that is why we chose this indirect source rule. Short of this option, this regulatory option, we had only the opportunity to regulate those emissions if we adopted identical non-road rules that are in use in California. And that is a much bigger lift. And so that is kind of the reason that we've ended up taking this route. And another reason is that the state of Oregon actually already has an indirect source rule already on the books, but it is very minimally protective in its current existing form. It basically requires fees for large parking lot construction. But it was, a way for us to get in and say, hey, you're already sort of trying to do this. Let's make it actually protective of human health. Let's make it really start to get at a lot of the diesel emissions that are causing a lot of health impacts that we can estimate cost us an estimated $3 billion a year in Oregon, statewide, and also are a leading cause of cancer toxicity in the Portland metro area. Probably this isn't news to all of you who have been working on diesel, but another thing that we've really been trying to emphasize on diesel lately is the fact that it is a short-term climate accelerant, meaning that within 20 years, it can have up to 3,000 times the carbon intensity of CO2. So if we can really start regulating diesel more effectively in Oregon, then we could have a real chance to, start meeting some of our climate goals faster. So the only other thing that I will share with you is just kind of a recap of how this has gone so far. The first step was developing the policy. Like I said, we worked very closely with Green Energy Institute to create this sort of like the petition for rulemaking that was required. The next step was building community support. So a lot of the folks who are here today participated in that. We had 21 organizations who signed on to the indirect source rule petition for rulemaking. And we also had several local governments submit letters of support. So this is, it's broadly accepted that this policy would meet a lot of our shared goals. Unfortunately, despite that support, industry opposition and lack of understanding of some of these issues at the Environmental Quality Commission led to our petition being denied in mid-March, just as everything was kind of blowing up with coronavirus. And it was a challenging time, definitely, to get that news, but also it was very hard to coordinate next steps. So I'm really excited today that we're going to talk a little bit more about where we're going from here. On the Environmental Quality Commission front, we are seeing that the EQC is trying to more fully understand this issue. And we are going to have Amelia Schlesser with Green Energy Institute speaking on a panel about diesel pollution at the next Environmental Quality Commission meeting, which is November 20th, a Friday. And we will send some follow-up information about that to everyone who's attended, so you can see what that looks like as the EQC tries to understand more about the diesel issues and how they are empowered to deal with it. But in the meantime, we are looking at the logical next step, which is the legislature directing the Environmental Quality Commission and Department of Environmental Quality to undertake rulemaking on indirect sources. So there wouldn't be the same need, this sort of feeling the EQC has historically had, that they're not sure, you know, if this is the way to address the problem. They haven't done some of the research that folks with Breathe have done to see that this is really kind of, we're limited to a few pathways that we can make this work. So I think that having the legislature direct those agencies to do rulemaking would make things easier. So I'm really excited that that step is kind of the next tool in our arsenal. And because of that, we have folks from the legislature here to talk to you today. And now I will hand it back to Mary to introduce them.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori. That was great. You know, it was disappointment, but we didn't stop. So I just want to say something before I hand the baton off to our legislators that have joined us. You know, Rep. Nosse, I don't think when he ran for office and was thinking about why he wanted to go down to Salem that he was honestly probably thinking about air quality, except for the fact that he cares deeply about the health and well-being of his constituents. Here, I'm going to even unmute you guys while I'm talking about you. Let's see. Somehow I can't unmute Rob.
There it happened. I had to select it.
Okay. So, but he has been, since the day that, you know, the Nosse study demonstrated that in his district, there was this insane gap in our regulations and in the way we protect our communities from air pollutants. He has really stepped up and just taken this on, and in a way that was frankly, you know, inspiring and astounding, because
it was scary. It was in my first term and I knew nothing about this topic.
Exactly. And yet that didn't stop him. It didn't stop him from being behind two of the most important, you know, things we've done in the decade that, you know, we've been working on air quality, Neighbors for Clean Air, you know, helping pass the Clean Air Oregon whole new industrial permitting program, but then in a really huge way, also holding the line and saying, you know, industry is a problem, but so is diesel. And diesel, you know, it is impacting people in ways they don't see as well as the industrial problems. So I really have appreciated his tenacity, dedication, and just frankly, the commitment to the health and well-being, not only of his own constituents, but of all Oregonians, to really take this on. And I've really appreciated getting to know him through this process. And, you know, he's going to talk a little bit about where we're at. There were some things coming out of our 2017 HB 2007 and the 2019 legislature session that was passed that, you know, has been work product for all of us in the meantime, in the interim. And then I'll be really excited to introduce one of our newest among an amazing class of freshmen that are going to be joining the legislature in 2021, Representative Maxine Dexter, who now, based on one block away from me, is no longer my representative district, sadly, but I'm so thrilled to have, you know, a doctor representing us in Oregon who really gets and cares about, the health and well-being and gets air pollution as an issue. I think she actually did see the problems of air pollution in her community and in her practice in a way that it's really nice to be able to have a starting point with somebody from that understands that. So I'm going to kind of let you guys, I'll
Okay.
let Rob start.
All right. So I won't go on too long, and Mary, maybe you and Tori want to sort of let me just take questions from the group. But so yeah, in my first term in the legislature in 2016, the Moss study issue was broke by the Mercury. And if any of you have any desire to go into politics, let me regale you with how awesome it is to have a big public health scare go on in your area of the world. In your first term in politics, where 500 people show up to a community forum, and let me tell you, that's not a thing, okay? And they bring their animals and their kids and mispronounce your last name and say to you, what are you going to do about it? It was pretty intense, actually. And I'll just say, air quality advocates and people that care about it, we're lucky that Neighbors for Clean Air had sort of been on the ground and existing and trying to work in this space for a few years. Actually, Representative Dexter, it was Rep. Greenlick that often introduced bills on behalf of Neighbors for Clean Air and Mary to try to do something about diesel emissions. And, I got into the diesel issue because after we with the help of Representative Karn Power and the help of Representative House Speaker Tina Kotek, got something going for clean air, for industrial pollutants. I remember saying, it was all the clean air advocates. It was people like Mary that were saying, really, this is good that we're doing this, but diesel emissions have been a long-standing problem. And I remember thinking, okay, can we figure out how to take this long-standing problem, because clean air is having a moment, and try to put some of the political capital that's asking us to regulate the industrial emissions and get at these diesel emissions. And so we finally did. In 2019, we passed House Bill 2007. We are in the process of trying to get that bill implemented. And I think the good thing about that bill is, in addition to trying to speed up how long a trucking company or a contractor or a business can have a diesel engine that is not up to snuff and collecting emissions. In addition to speeding that up, we are deep in the hunt right now as we speak of trying to do what other states that do a better job on this than we do at the moment, is figure out how we could create a pool of money so that small businesses that need to invest in cleaner equipment could do it faster and get some assistance to do that with some sort of, a loan, an outright subsidy. This is how they do it in California and Texas, of all places, where they do a better job of getting these emissions under control. The one sort of compromise that we made to get 2007 passed, and this is something that the legislature has done periodically from time to time, but I think it was the right thing to do, was, okay, we will limit this sort of enhanced regulation and the whatever incentives we give to sort of get businesses to move to a cleaner engine faster to the Tri-County area. And we did that because the politics in the Tri-County area, though Clackamas County is changing as a result of this last election, we're not so good there anymore. We're better. The political environment in the metro area and the Tri-County area was such that it would accept diesel regulation in a way that the rest of the state was not so much willing to embrace. And once we opted out the rest of the state, the bill became a lot easier to pass because suddenly legislators that objected were not impacted by it. And in addition to that being, I think, an appropriate compromise, it also, frankly, centers the problem where the problem is the worst. The emission problems, the air quality problems are actually the worst in the Portland metro area and in the Willamette Valley, though we could also argue that Medford has its own challenges as well. But and so we're deep in the hunt right now of trying to make that work. Mary and I will be in a meeting next week, analyzing a bunch of different approaches that we might take to, I'm going to say this to this group, I hope this is okay, tax or fee something that will allow us to raise a modicum of revenue or maybe a lot of revenue to be able to offer an incentive to a business person who's looking at trying to get a cleaner truck or a cleaner cement mixer and do it faster and get some help doing that. So stay tuned. That was actually in the crash that was passing clean energy jobs or cap and trade or whatever we were calling it. That was actually one of the more progressive pieces of air pollution and carbon legislation that was passed probably in the United States, actually.
You're not wrong, Representative Nosse. It was actually, we're only the second state in the country to actually have any diesel emission regulations. So it was not a small feat.
And I really do have to credit, Karn Power, Representative Karn Power, who, who did the bulk of the negotiating on that bill and her committee with help from Mary. And is Nikki on this call? Is your lobbyist? Okay. But you guys made a really good strategic choice in hiring a lobbyist who could be in the Capitol full time and actually did a good job on your behalf. And then the other thing I have to say is that Tina Kotek, when she sets her mind to making something happen, she works very hard to try to make that happen. And I think I can say this with this crowd. I'm an openly gay man. The speaker's a lesbian. Karn Power's a lesbian. We kind of referred to ourselves as Gay Diesel Caucus in an attempt to try to get the bill passed. So with that, I think that's enough of an update, Mary, and I'm happy to take questions or pass the baton on to somebody else and let them talk for a little bit.
Yeah, I think we'll let Representative Dexter take over. We are taking questions in the chat, and we do encourage people, please, and if they're for one of the speakers, one of the legislators, we'll make sure if they don't see them tonight that they do answer. But I'm going to let our newest legislator take over. I'm so thrilled to have her representing us in Salem. You're not, oh, you're still muted, sorry.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone. So yes, I am Maxine Dexter, and I am really privileged and honored to be HD33's newest representative taking over from Mitch Greenlick. So this is Northwest Portland and Northeast Washington County, and it really incorporates the industrial hub of Portland. And so we have some of the worst air quality in our city, which is part of the reason, or in our state, which is part of the reason I was motivated to run. I am a pulmonologist at Kaiser Permanente, and so I take care of people with lung diseases. And it's been a wild time to take office. I was appointed in June, and of course, shortly thereafter, we had wildfire smoke that was deeply impacting not just my family, but my patients, and seeing people ending up on life support related to smoke exposure drove the importance of this home in a way that was more than I could have even imagined, honestly. So right now, there is this crazy conflation. Rep. Nosse talked about the public health crises and how that impacts your role as a representative. And right now, COVID-19 is really doing that for me in conjunction with my role as a critical care doctor. I just came off shift last night, and we are seeing huge impacts and really are running out of beds. And so this is an area that's multifocal, because those with lung diseases are much more likely to contract COVID, and those who are exposed to smoke or particulate matter are more likely to contract it and have more severe manifestations of COVID-19. So the wildfire plus COVID-19 was a public health nightmare, and we need to do everything we can to protect ourselves and our future. So after I was appointed, we all saw firsthand a lot of things, and we are going to continue to. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm so grateful to Mary and Tori and Neighbors for Clean Air for helping get me going, because I honestly am learning a lot about the technicalities of this. So we have 3 bills that are air quality related that we are going to be working on. One is better protection for workers when air quality is bad. We saw this during the wildfires. Certain employer requirements for protection of their workers, whether it's at an air quality index of 151 or higher. Certain respirators will be required when workers are working outside. To when we're at 500 or higher, which we did see with the wildfire smoke, certified respirators would have to be required if employees were going to be expected to be reporting to work. I would make an argument that we should not have anyone working outside in those situations. There's also some posting and other things that we're going to ask so that it's not just a rule, but it's a rule that the workers are aware of. So Oregon also has to create better systems for holding employers accountable for maintaining the safety of their workers. And when you don't have control of air quality, I think that there's an inclination to say, well, sorry, we have to get the work done, but we all need to have a collective agreement that health and safety is our first priority. And I think workers deserve that at all levels throughout our economy. Another bill is to better protect Oregonians from unhealthy air, focusing on HVAC systems. So again, with the wildfires, we saw that buildings aren't made to keep the air inside highly safe. Even in our hospital, our Sunnyside Medical Center has this amazing HVAC system, but it is dependent on bringing outside air. So we actually were coming home working at Sunnyside in the ICU during the wildfire smelling like campfire smoke because we couldn't keep the particulate matter out of our hospitals, and we were all wearing N95s while at work. So we have got to think about this moving forward and incentivizing the ability for HVAC systems to improve the air quality inside so that people can find refuge and public buildings. I'd like to make that a requirement moving forward for new builds and retrofits. And Mary is, of course, going to be very helpful with that. The final bill that we're going to help with is directly related to the indirect source rule. And so I am going to defer to Mary and Tori on the details of that, but I'm excited to work with you to really work hard to continue in the vein that Rep. Nosse and Rep. Power have already started. We've got to get particulate matter down, and our off-road construction, traffic, locomotives, airplanes, we've got a lot of diesel fumes that are not being regulated. So it would be my hope that we can understand the impact of that on our health and the health of our planet and see what we can do moving forward together.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time that the representatives shared with us tonight. I'm also really appreciating the very lively chat going on, and I think it's really just a testimony to everybody who's joined us tonight, all participants. You're just such a great, thoughtful group, and I appreciate the conversation that's happening through the chat. So, and thanks, Rep. Nosse, for jumping in too, and thank you. So yeah, we're going to be tracking these and obviously helping and trying to support and providing you all with more information as all of the initiatives in the 2021 session move forward. I'm going to just talk to you a little bit now about sort of what we're doing to kind of keep the campaign going. One of the things that we've really struggled with on diesel is not, you know, just not really having the same mandate of the, you know, the awareness and the visibility around what is our biggest air pollution issues. Industry, and believe me, I started this work 10 years ago because we had a very large industrial polluter in our, you know, Northwest neighborhood, and I was, you know, horrified to find out how, you know, unhealth protective our regulations were. And at that point, 10 years ago, we really only had the opportunity to work directly and do it through a civic, you know, like a neighborhood community agreement directly with the industry, because we didn't have a you know, political mandate. We didn't have the governor stepping in, and we didn't have state legislators stepping in to fund a whole new air program. But in the meantime, while I also, you know, was concerned about that, and certainly was very heartened to see the development of an industry-specific program through the Clean Air Oregon program to improve our permitting, you know, we all have a right to breathe clean air, and the clean air and the air pollution is really coming from much more ubiquitous sources, and that is more difficult. And it's more difficult also because it doesn't quite have the same community-based initiative that, you know, a lot of addressing the industrial pollution became. And so that's been something that we've been grappling with almost since 2016. You know, how can we make the problem of our biggest problem of air pollution in our region as real and as motivating to folks as the problem of the industry pollution that really helped change and overhaul that system. So for many years we've been working, Tori alluded to our Breathe Oregon project, and one of the things that we've been trying and wanting to do with Breathe Oregon that we finally get to do this year is launch a whole new tool, web-based tool that to help make the diesel pollution a little bit more understandable in our communities, which then, once it's more understandable and visible, it then becomes more actionable. There, you know, it becomes easier for folks to get at it. So we are launching, we've actually launched a whole new organizational website, neighborsforcleanair.org, and our other URL that we've always had, what'sinair.org, is now part of this Deconstructing Diesel tool. And so what we want to make it obvious to people is, you know, diesel is a very big, as that previous slide showed, it's a huge problem, it's ubiquitous, but you can break it down into digestible chunks of what it's actually coming from. And the thing that I think surprises most people is how much is coming from the non-road and construction activity that we're living with. And so we wanted to try and make that as actionable for folks as an industry smokestack. And in order to do that, one, educate folks on where the diesel's coming from, and then you know, create an ability to actually see what those emissions look like. This was only possible because of work that our state has done in the recent years, both in funding, getting EPA funds to work with Portland State University researchers to do the actual more diesel monitoring on the ground and really fingerprinting different diesel emission sources so that we could really fine tune where the diesel pollution was coming from. So that's been hugely important. But also the state legislature directed the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to do an inventory of the non-road equipment, because so much of our work then is based on modeling, you know, based on sort of assumptions. And what we found, and this non-road equipment survey was only released last spring, just in time for us to incorporate it into our diesel toolkit for construction, that our equipment, the diesel equipment that's being used at construction sites, is significantly older and being used longer than EPA emissions estimates have been. So that original slide of the red all over, that's based on EPA's diesel emissions assumptions. And we know that the problem is actually worse because the diesel equipment we found out that's used in Oregon, due to the fact because we haven't had regulations, we haven't had incentives and stronger commitment to getting the diesel off, you know, the older diesel equipment out of the state, we do in Oregon use older diesel engines. So the type of equipment that we really are concerned about are all the equipment that's used at, you know, construction sites where they're doing the groundbreaking digging, excavation pieces of it. That's where we found the oldest equipment. So what have we done? We utilize that information with the City of Portland's permit database. And the permit database is a dynamic input to our website that as new permits come on board, they come into our website, and then we're able to analyze them in terms of their potential diesel impact based on the square footage and some other components that we've analyzed. And so anybody can go onto our website now, and there is, if you look at the middle of this, the search bar marker, you can actually put an address in and find out what permits, what construction activity is going to happen in your community. Some of it you can just look out the window and see, some of it is permitted and it's coming online. Then it also gives you a value for that based on small, medium, large, and these are based on assumptions. It's not based on an actual equipment list that we know that developer is planning to use. It's based on the assumptions, but more refined assumptions of what we know are the average equipment ages and standards of equipment that are used in Oregon. So it is more refined, and it gives you a pretty good idea of, you know, where you could start talking, you know, with a local developer. You know, a lot of neighborhood associations get this information and they get the chance to talk to developers about maybe the parking, you know, impacts or other livability issues. And now you have a tool to talk to them about what the construction is, how it's going to actually affect your air quality. And as you can imagine, for many of our neighborhoods, you know, it's not just about one, you know, construction development site. You know, I mean, I'm living in Northwest Portland. I was in the new Slabtown area. There were 8 different buildings consecutively being built. And so this is an ongoing problem. And so while that's what's made this so much more difficult though, because it feels like a moving target. We need, because of that, we can't do this one good neighbor agreement or development contract at a time. We need a statewide clean standard for our air quality. But this would be a first step, I think, for people to start interacting and start to understand the diesel problem in the same way that they discreetly understand other emissions and more stationary problems in our communities. So we're really excited to get this out there and to work with anybody who wants some, you know, has a group that wants to talk about it. We're in the position where we would love to find, you know, identify, you know, in the next 12 months, up to 3 to 6 groups that might want to try and work out a good neighbor agreement. We would love, directly with the developer, we'd love to talk to you about how we could support that work and that help. And in the meantime, we just really want to give people a better way to understand the diesel that's actually being, you know, in their neighborhood. I just want to tell you our next steps. I mean, we are going to be working on this ground game of trying to help people understand the construction activity in their neighborhood. We will be working with the City of Portland, who was a huge supporter of our indirect source rule campaign and is still incredibly motivated to start looking at opportunities at the city level for regulating air and managing air quality in the city. And we're going to be working very closely with them. I want to just highlight a couple of things coming up. So Tori already mentioned, but we want to make sure people see that the EQC, as I said, when they denied the petition, as much as that felt like a slam door, it really actually was a starting point for EQC. They've continually committed to trying to understand this problem and addressing it. Little frustrating because I feel like they could have done a little bit more homework before they denied the petition, but I'm going to really acknowledge that there has been a serious commitment from EQC members to get their head around this. And next week, our partner from the Breathe Oregon project, GEI staff attorney Amy Schlusser, is joining a really great lineup of people, including Dennis McLaren, who is the Region 10 EPA administrator and was a huge, did a lot of work on diesel in his work there, and a couple other, I think there's some DEQ staff. And so they're going to have a diesel emissions and pollution reduction panel at the EQC meeting. I really highly encourage many of you to show up. Let the EQC know that you're interested about this. Our next meeting another thing that we learned through the wildfires and others was, you know, how important local air monitoring was to people to understand, and how people were finding really big distinctions in their neighborhoods. And the Purple Air Monitoring Project, it's a network of independent individuals who, you know, buy a Purple Air monitor and set it up, and then they become part of a network. We saw how useful that was for people to really understand the air quality differences. They could also see some of the distinctions between highly localized monitor data versus some of the state data that they were getting, which neither one was wrong. It just was actually a really much finer grain understanding of air quality changes. But what we also noticed during that period of time, people's heightened interest was huge gaps in where the Purple Air monitors are, because this is just individual volunteer opt-in crowdsourced project, right? And so there are huge gaps, for example, in outer Southeast County in the Portland metro region. There's huge gaps in some of our more, you know, the areas where we know that there are environmental justice issues around air quality. So Neighbors for Clean Air decided this year to commit to, we've already purchased 10, we're waiting for them, they were on back order. And we are trying to increase the capacity, community capacity on understanding your own air quality. And we're going to be looking for hosts, and we're hoping to expand this up to 25 by the end of 2021. They're accessible, but you know, it's expensive to put that many out on the street. And we also realize that because it's a volunteer program, that there's a lot of issues around the quality of data based on, you know, the maintenance and the understanding of the setup. So we're working with Dr. Julianne Fry, who's one of our key research partners on diesel, working with PSU researchers from Reed College, and she's helping us develop a protocol and implementation for our Purple Air monitors, and for us to help identify hosts and then provide those hosts with good guidance on how to set it up and how to use it and maintain it. So she's going to be joining us our next meeting, December 10th, and we're going to be looking for folks that we can partner with in the community to really start getting deeper into some of these gaps of where there aren't Purple Air. If you Google Purple Air, you'll get a map and you'll get to see where these are. And again, there is no you know, entity in charge of that. It's all individuals opting in, but we're going to really try and hope to bolster that to be better representation of all the neighborhoods that really need to know what's in their air. So that's what we have going on the next steps. And I am thrilled that it's 3 minutes to 5. We did say we try and wrap up our presentations by that time, by 5 o'clock to honor everybody's time. But I'm so thrilled to see you all here. And I really appreciate that you spent the time, and I really appreciate the time of Representative Nosse and Dexter. And I don't know, do you guys, I'm a little nervous. I guess, Kristen, I'm gonna look to you. Do you wanna try and take some questions, or give people just the chance to finish up?
So if, do people have any questions, any thoughts they want to share off the top of your head that you haven't gotten answered in the chat so far?
You're gonna have to let us know, because I have to unmute you. So
one of the things you can do is go down to reactions, and there's a sort of emoji that looks like a clapping hand, and I will be scanning through. If you put that up, I can see. Does anybody? No one has anything so far.
Again, the conversation in the chat has been great, and I appreciate somebody even like posted the cost of the monitors. Yes, they're $250 each.
Oh, I thought they were okay.
If anybody is particularly interested in this, please let us know. And we're really looking forward to getting this network out and started, and working with Dr. Fry to get that set up. So I think I'm going to let people go, and we hope to see you all next month. again. We really hope you'll show up to the EQC. Also, the EQC is really good about recording their meetings, so I think you'd be able to catch up. But if you're not already registered with DEQs or the listserv for the Environmental Quality Commission and get notices, we'll send out a link for that after this meeting as a follow-up.
And I would be remiss as the development person if I didn't let people know they can go to our website and give through our website to support this program. We could support purchase of purple air monitors, to support greater outreach of this tool, to support particularly figuring out ways to engage people in digital organizing during this time. And also we are looking to translate a lot of our materials. Racial justice is an incredibly important aspect of what we do. So please go ahead. It looks like you can go to our website and do that. It looks like Vivian has a quick question.
I am. I see if I can unmute her fast. I've got to find her. Let's see. Okay.
Did you find Vivian? There you go.
I'm usually at the bottom of the alphabetical list. Thanks so much for the presentation. I hope this can be a quick question. I'm just curious, there was earlier in the chat a question about airports, and my understanding is obviously PDX is a huge contributor to air pollution, but the regulations for the commercial airlines, is complex. And I recently was told that actually because of the type of fuel that is used for private travel, and that air traffic is usually coming through Hillsborough, that there's a lot of disproportionate air pollution that happens from the Hillsborough airport. So can you share a little bit more around that, air travel and pollution that's coming from those industries? Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian, for that question. And airports, rail yards, all those, yeah, they pose their own problems. You are not incorrect, though, about the impact of the smaller, like the Hillsborough Airport. And what we found a few years ago, and I was working with this with Representative Greenlick, was that Hillsborough Airport was one of the largest sources of lead in all of Oregon. And that was due to the fact of continued use of leaded gas that's been, outlawed in many other places, but was still being allowed in these smaller planes, a leaded gas for these smaller planes. And so Representative Greenlick was very committed to trying to get rid of that leaded gas. And it was interesting because I also had a friend at the time who was a doctor at the Virginia Garcia Clinic, and said, they were having difficulties with many of their patients coming back with high levels of lead, that they couldn't, their general screening process that they would go through with the families of trying to identify the lead source was not showing, indications of lead exposures in the more traditional places. And I mentioned to him how, the Hillsborough Airport's the largest source of lead in the community, in the state. And, they were quite surprised. And they, again, these correlations directly are very hard to prove sometimes, but it certainly intuitively seemed to indicate that there was a significant problem out there. And so I'll be really honest, there was development of, this is a thing that Portland has often said is going to be resolved through market forces as the lead, but I probably need to do a little bit of research to kind of see where we're at on that legislation and what happened with that coming on board. The other issue around airports, and I'm being a little bit, the indirect source rule generally can capture a pretty wide net. One of the things that we worked with in the petition, though, was that the indirect source rule would address not just the particulate pollution and the black carbon, but also greenhouse gas, which I think the airports are also significant contributors to. So we would like to see this move forward for that reason, because we also think it could be a huge tool to get at some of these really big greenhouse gas emitters as well. So I appreciate the question, Vivian. I'm going to follow up with you a little bit on do a little homework more on the work that was being done directly on the airport. I know we have somebody from Hillsborough with us tonight. Oh, hi. Sure. And I would love to follow up on that because I think it's a really important issue.
Are there any other questions before we let you go for the evening? Anything? I don't see any hands raised, but if you have any questions and I'm not seeing them, you can also just pop it into the chat. Anything?
I did notice that Kimberly, who is our Hillsborough, has, and it doesn't surprise me she'd be up on this, has put something in the chat about where we are with the gas in the trials, but it doesn't sound as positive as I'd like it, as we'd all hope it to be. So something to catch up on, I think. So thank you. I'm going to let everybody go. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you so much. I'm always so appreciative of the tremendous community effort and support and energy behind this work. And it's great to see everybody. And again, Representatives Dexter and Nosse, your dedication on this is fantastic. I just really appreciate your time. Thank you. Thanks to my staff. Thanks to all you great people.